What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and happy Father's Day! Well, considering how Father's Day is tomorrow, it's kind of noticeable once you realize that more often than not, it's kind of my deal to do things early. But like with my Mother's Day list where I talked about the best mothers in video games, I decided to do the same thing, but with dads. And naturally, when you think about it, considering how my own father was not in my life for most of my teenage years, in fairness, but considering even with that, I still wouldn't be where I am today without him. So it really says a lot for me. That being said, and more or less, I decided to shine a light on the best and most exemplary fathers in video games as a whole. That being said, it's time to count down the top 10 best fathers in video games. And honestly, what more is there to say? Let's get on into it. Starting off with number 10, we have Kazuma Kiryu from the Yakuza franchise. Okay, we start off this video with a character that is less of a father in the traditional sense and more of a father figure. But in all fairness, kind of makes sense with Kazuma Kiryu as a whole, to say the least, as he's one of the few characters who has served as a mentor figure throughout the years. But more often than not, it's his aspect as a father figure that's put to the test in multiple Yakuza games. Starting with the very first Yakuza title, and its remake, Yakuza Kiwami, where he basically ends up coming across Haruka, the young daughter of a friend of his named Megumi, who of course ends up disappearing. So he more or less not only offers to help her look for her mother, but he also ends up taking care of her like a father would, even going on a mission to rescue her when she gets kidnapped multiple times. And in all fairness, it's some of the more heartwarming scenes actually come from that game. And it's not for nothing that when you consider that Haruka is basically pretty smart for her age in that game. But of course, there's the fact how he takes care of her as a father really says a lot. To the point that he takes full responsibility of her by Yakuza Kiwami 2. Which really, in all fairness, oh my god, the fact that we almost got Kaoru as a sort of maternal figure for Haruka is just disappointing. But at the same time, yeah. Even with that, we do see a bit of a familial bond between Kiryu and Haruka growing in Yakuza Kiwami 2. And heck, goes even further with Yakuza 3 and its Kiwami remake, Yakuza Kiwami 3, where he ends up gaining control of the Sunflower Orphanage in in Okinawa, Japan, basically taking care of and serving as a paternal figure to other orphans in the game, as well as Haruka herself. And this is because he naturally remembers what it means to grow up in an orphanage, being how this was the same orphanage that he, Megumi, and Nishikiyama actually grew up. Boy. But that being said, even with that, it's fair to say that his paternal instincts have rubbed off on Haruka even in later entries of the games, because especially when Yakuza 5 and 6 come to mind, as in Yakuza 5, Haruka comes into her own as a protagonist by basically training to become an idol. Whereas in Yakuza 6, he eventually ends up, while we swap back to Kiryu, he basically just comes into his own as a sort of grandfather figure to Haruka's own son, Haruto. And yeah, he's basically the standard caring grandfather. Yeah. And that being said, while we don't really see that much to it, the fact that both Haruka and Haruto do make a return in Yakuza Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, but we don't see an interaction between them and Kiryu, it's just one of the most heartbreaking moments ever. Because if it wasn't for Kiryu, Haruka wouldn't have become the woman that he was at that point. Just goes to show that sometimes you don't have to be related to have a fatherly bond with someone. Just really says a lot. Moving on, next at number 9, we have Michael DeSanta from Grand Theft Auto 5. Yeah. Yet another career criminal makes it onto the list. Surprisingly enough, when you consider that Kiryu is a member of the Yakuza, and Michael DeSanta is a former bank robber. So, yeah, you guys are possibly wondering why they're on this list, on the list of the best dads, considering they've done some stuff that are kind of questionable at best. Well, it's kind of proof that when it comes down to being a parent, it's not as easy as it looks. In fact, Michael DeSanta shows how being a parent is just difficult. As throughout the entirety of GTA 5, you mostly control Michael trying to basically make a name for himself and take care of his family while more or less trying to get away from his life, get away from his former life of crime, only for things to go awry when an effort to get money in an effort when a jewelry heist, basically an effort to get money, to pay off a Colombian kingpin named Martin Madrazo, ends up going awry, thus bringing back his, former cohort / eccentric best friend Trevor back into his life, basically pulling him back in. And even with that, he more or less tries to keep his life, his old life and his new life separate, and so they don't intertwine. Basically hiding the fact that he was laying low after their previous botched jewelry and botched bank heist, ended up with the death of his and Trevor's old friend Brad, who, ended up taking the fall for Michael. And even with that, he's basically still just trying to relive the glory days, just watching old movies and trying to feel something that he felt when he was younger. Which, again, is very hard to say when you consider that his family especially makes it harder, considering his wife's countless affairs, including with her dim-witted tennis coach Kyle Chavis and her snooty and sanctimonious yogi, Fabian. The fact that his son Jimmy is basically just a standard nerd who spends almost all of his time playing video games, and the fact that his daughter Tracy is constantly doing whatever she can in her power to become famous. And I mean anything. In all fairness, while basically going to therapy about to basically come to grips with his past life and basically try to, and especially to be there for his family. Of course, even with that, he's still willing to protect his family from whatever comes to essentially harm them. As when he and his son basically, he attended a movie premiere for a film that he had a hand in creating, alongside former movie producer Solomon Richards. He basically learns that a couple of goons led by Devin Weston are storming his house as they speak, so he basically heads back to his house to protect his wife and daughter from Weston's mercenaries. And yeah, it proves that even though he's had his issues with them, he's still willing to help them out. I mean, heck, even at the beginning, he's basically willing to go Papa Bear here to protect his daughter Tracy from being, taken advantage of by a lot of big Hollywood types, as he makes his way out to a yacht in order to protect his daughter from a couple of rich frat boys, or a bunch of rich media types who are willing to basically use her assets for their own gain. And it really does show that he cares. Again, it has been a long time since I played GTA 5. But even with that, I've seen a lot that I could garner from that game that basically shows how much of a solid father Michael is. And that's not even mentioning about how he also serves as a father figure / mentor to fellow protagonist Franklin Clinton. Yeah. Really does say a lot. Really does. Moving on, next at number 8, we have Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII. Oh boy, okay. When it comes down to the Final Fantasy franchise, I had a rough go of it, considering how Final Fantasy has a whole bunch of fathers that would have been considered for this list. I mean, for the most of it, we have the likes of characters like Saj from Final Fantasy XIII. We have Shadow from Final Fantasy VI. And we have the likes of both Cid and Tella from Final Fantasy IV. However, basically, when it comes to Final Fantasy, I think we all know who definitely fits that moment. As basically that foul-mouthed merc with the machine gun for an arm, Barrett Wallace from Final Fantasy VII. And naturally, when it comes down to it, Barrett's one of the most badass characters in the game, since more often than not, his main goal is to take the fight to Shinra for basically screwing up the environment, and to the point of leading a group of saboteurs led as mercenaries, which includes the likes of Jesse, Biggs, Wedge, and everyone's favorite spiky blonde-haired emo pretty boy, Cloud, to basically destroy and sabotage Shinra's reactors. And he is very particular involving the environment, especially considering how most of this stems from his wife, Myrna, who was dealing with a terminal illness. And he gave a plea to Shinra to help her out, to help her with her treatment. And honestly, that really does say a lot. Of course, that being said, considering that things don't work out as planned, as not only does Myrna succumb to her illness, but he ends up dealing with some very serious injuries and losing a hand, which led him to get a machine gun grafted onto his arm as a sort of prosthetic. But even with that, the biggest one is when he comes across Marlene, the daughter of his old friend Dine. And with that fact, he more or less assumes that Dine is dead. So, as such, he ends up deciding to take care of Marlene as if she was his own daughter. And honestly, in fairness, I gotta say it, while he's basically your standard stereotypical scary black man, he's nothing more than just a big old teddy bear, as he cares very, very deeply for Marlene's well-being. Even to the point of basically acting like a standard stereotypical proud papa when he thinks about how fast Marlene is growing up in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Even though she's more or less younger than 10. But still, he's basically shedding tears over her, like almost as if to the point that it makes you think that she's a teenager and becoming fairly independent quite quickly. And it really does say a lot when you consider he also shares a bit of unease towards Kate Sif, naturally due to his link with Shinra. But even with that, Barrett's just one of the few characters who proves that even though most people don't look the part, they can be appearances can fairly be deceiving. And also, I kind of like the big black characters who look intimidating, but they can be but they can be caring when it comes down to it. Kind of like DJ from the Total Drama franchise, or DJ from the Total Drama series, or Murdoch from Pokemon Horizons, the series. Yeah. Also, the fact that he's voiced by both Bo Billingsley and John Eric Bentley, two black men, I believe, really says a lot. Moving on next at number 7, we have John Marston from Red Dead Redemption. Alright. For those of you who don't know, I've played Red Dead Redemption. I have not played it all through. In fact, I'm still somewhere in Mexico, I believe. I kind of forgot where it is, but I got fairly well into the Mexico leg of the game. But even with that, I gotta say, John Marston is one of the few protagonists that's one of the most conflicted yet unconventional heroes in gaming. And that really says a lot. Especially due to his past with the Vanderlyn gang, who the remnants of which he ends up hunting down in the first game. But heck, as we learn in the game, he's only doing it in order to rescue his wife and his son Jack, who have been who are basically captured and held hostage by the Pinkertons. Yeah, the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But even with that, the fact, like Michael DeSanta, he's willing to do a lot for his family. And especially his son Jack. Which really says a lot when you consider how things were in the eventual sequel game, Red Dead Redemption 2. As we get to see younger versions of John and Abigail, as well as Jack as a child. And more often than not, John is a lot different than he was in the first game. As not only is he a lot more reckless, but the first time we see him, he's basically mauled by grizzly bears. Which is saying a lot. But of course, that being said, you gotta admit, John does basically, even with that, we learned that Jack, he only takes care of Jack due to Dutch and the rest of the, due to Dutch basically and the rest of the Vanderlyn gang basically convincing him that Jack was his son. Although, we don't know if that is the case. But even with that, it's very fair to say that Arthur Morgan is a better father in Red Dead Redemption 2 than John Marston is, to Jack, than John Marston is. But in the first game, he really does step up to the plate. Not only basically doing what he can to hunt the remnants of his gang, including Dutch, in order to get back his wife and son, but he also spends his time on his family farm just basically teaching Jack the ropes and helping him in his efforts to become a man. And it really does say a lot. Of course, that being said, and this is a spoiler for anyone who has not played through Red Dead Redemption, this includes me, the ending. Yeah. In the ending, Edgar Ross and an entire squad of Pinkertons, an entire posse of Pinkertons, end up coming to collect what's due. Due to the fact that, well, John Marston really can't escape his past as an outlaw. And what does he do? He sends both Jack and Abigail to safety. He basically sends both Jack and Abigail to safety and telling Jack to take care of his mother while he basically stands by at the farm and goes through an entire last stand against Edgar Ross and his boys, which leads to him losing his life in a shootout. Honestly, just one of the most saddest moments. And this is a guy who is willing to sacrifice himself to give his family a better life. Granted, Jack does basically eventually. We do see Jack as a young adult in the epilogue of the first Red Dead Redemption game, where he finally gets his revenge on Edgar Ross for killing his father. But even with that, even with that, John Marston showed an amazing influence to his son, even in his own way. That's the best you can do. That's a lot. Alright. Moving on next at number 6, we have King Rome, Bosphoramus, Hyrule from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Yeah, as much as Final Fantasy, the Zelda franchise is also kind of an interesting game to say the least. And it basically says just, which of Zelda's fathers is the best father? And that's really saying a lot, as there's not just Zelda's as again, Zelda's not the only one who has amazing fathers in the game, as there are a lot of other fathers in the franchise that are also mentioned, but yeah, it's hard to figure out which of those are the better ones. Especially when you consider the likes of characters like Talon and King Zora Deban, who aren't gonna be winning any awards for Father of the Year anytime soon. However, in terms of Zelda's fathers, granted, I was going to be considering Headmaster Kepera from Skyward Sword, or the King of Red Lions from Wind Waker. However, there's one character who basically shows up as a wandering old man from the start of the game, from the start of Breath of the Wild, showing up at opportune times during the game, who was staring me right in the face. King Rome Bosphoramus Hyrule. And naturally, when it comes to Breath of the Wild, it starts off as differently like most other Zelda games. I say differently when you realize that it starts off similarly to most other Zelda games, as it basically has Link just waking up after spending some time asleep. However, in this case, when you exile from the area that Link was sleeping in and arrive to the expansive Great Plateau, you're basically seeing an entire world at your entire expansive world at your fingertips. And the first one you come across is an old man near a fire with some baked apples on it. And this old man is basically showing you everything it's basically just everywhere, giving you hints about what to do or where to go next. In fact, I thank that old man for basically getting me to start the game proper. But in all fairness, yeah, when he eventually reveals himself as the King of Hyrule, as King Rome of Hyrule, yeah. Honestly, it is one of the most impressive moments I've ever seen in a game. And keep in mind, at this moment, I have not seen a memory But when you consider that King Rome basically, he more or less became him invested in the property, in a prophecy that he heard involving his daughter and her chosen knight, which just so happens to be Link. He spends all of his time unearthing the guardians and the 4 divine beasts in order to find out if it was true. And as such, he eventually discovers Zelda taking great interest in those things. And he does a lot to basically just foster her interest in scientific and academic study. Granted, things do go awry when Zelda's mother ends up dying, which, when it comes to the wild duology, that does happen a lot. Seriously. We see what happened to Sonia in Tears of the Kingdom, but that's neither here nor there. But even with that, he basically decides to help her to help her grow her innate magical powers so she can be able to seal Ganondorf when the time comes. Of course, that being said, it seems to more or less push her away. However, even with that, he does eventually come to grips that, more often than not, the fact that she hadn't been working on strengthening her latent abilities was naturally due to her interest in becoming a scholar. And he basically, more or less, seems to regret the burdens that he put on her. And yeah, I haven't finished playing through Breath of the Wild or found a lot of the memories in that game. Seriously, those memories are hard. Also, in my first playthrough, I got stuck on Varuta, but that's neither here nor there. But even with that, still willing to go back to Breath of the Wild and play through it just to see that familial, that father-daughter bond that Zelda and King Rome went through. I mean, heck, he's one of two kings / Zelda's fathers who has ever been in a Hyrule Warriors game. But he's much more of a skilled fighter than the King of Red Lions, for obvious reasons. So, yeah, really says a lot. Also, it's better than the unnamed unnamed versions of the King of Hyrule and Zelda's father that we see in like Link to the Past or Echoes of Wisdom or even Minish Cap, so there's that. Moving on next at number 5, we have Dr. Eggman from the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. Alright. As many people know, I am autistic. And it has been kind of a thing of a commonality that there are a lot of autistic individuals out there, a lot of people on the autism spectrum out there that are very big fans of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise for whatever reason. And honestly, I have played a bit of Sonic. However, I wouldn't say it's my special interest. Mainly that just so happens to be Pokemon Fire Emblem. But after playing through Sonic Frontiers, after playing a bit of Sonic Frontiers, I have to say, I get it. And honestly, Sonic Frontiers is one of the most beautiful Sonic games I have ever played. Just, chef's kiss. That being said, honestly, when it comes down to it, one thing tends to surprise me more than anything else. The fact that Eggman is a father. And yeah, while we don't really... I really haven't gotten to that point further into Sonic Frontiers at that point. But I have seen countless amount of memes and mentions about Eggman being the father of Sage. And while I haven't seen it for myself, I mean, heck, I've seen the death battle between Eggman and Bowser, which mentions about Eggman being Sage's father. And heck, in fairness, most I've seen of this has been Eggman being stuck in a specific area in cyberspace where he's more or less impressed by how everything is. And while we do see, and of course, I've seen glimpses of Sage. And while she seems like a cold, unfeeling AI program, she's just a character who's trying her best to, who's trying her best to who's trying her best to find out what it truly means to be human. Like, human connection, love, friendship. All the things that mostly you clue into what that can clue you in to become what it is to be human. And honestly, it says a lot once you realize that at a certain point of in the Sonic Frontiers DLC, like in a certain ending, you basically see Eggman just finally making an effort to be a father to Sage. And honestly, it's one of the most heartwarming moments ever. Also, a shout out to Josh Scorcher for his villain songs list, and him cluing me into, well, the Sonic Frontiers song Dear Father, which honestly is one of the most heartwarming songs ever, and I gotta say, kind of reminds me of my own father. And keep in mind, as an autistic individual, I want to be a father myself, so says a lot. Oh my god, I almost got a tear to my eye. Moving on next at number 4, we have Gregory Edgeworth. Speaking of a character who more or less sets an example for his child, I gotta mention about the Ace Attorney franchise. which has a lot of interesting characters and thus a lot of interesting fathers that tend to come to mind. Granted, heck, to be honest, I could also consider Phoenix Wright as a father in himself, considering how he acts as an adoptive father towards his adoptive daughter, Trucy. Or even Apollo Justice's father, or Dirk Sadmati from Ace Attorney, Spirit of Justice. If I played Spirit of Justice, which I hadn't at this moment. However, I gotta give it to Gregory Edgeworth. Because if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have the pinnacle of justice that is Miles Edgeworth. And yeah, it really does say a lot. As basically from a young age, Gregory Edgeworth was once a notable defense attorney. And it was his staunch stance on justice, as well as his effort to stand up for the little guy. That basically inspired Miles Edgeworth to basically want to become a defense attorney, just like his father. I mean, heck, even in 4th grade, he even stands up for Phoenix Wright for a young Phoenix Wright when he was accused of stealing their other friend Larry Butts' money. And this is Larry, mind you, so yeah, that's really setting a low bar. But even with that, it's due to Gregory Edgeworth's inspiration that made Miles just want to become a great defense attorney like his father. And considering his again have not played Ace Attorney Investigations duology yet, but considering IS6, yeah, we definitely see mentions of that in that game. And how Gregory Edgeworth played a role in it. But when it comes down to it, yeah, you guys know where I'm gonna go at. The DL6 incident. And like the number one best mother in video games, Misty Faye, Gregory Edgeworth was also involved in the DL6 incident, largely going against noted and infamously ruthless prosecutor Manfred von Karma. And it was thanks to him that basically he more or less shattered von Karma's sort of spotless win record in court. Yeah. Of course, as much as we know, things don't go as planned, as eventually there was an earthquake, and there was an earthquake that trapped both Miles and his father, Gregory Edgeworth, inside of an elevator with a bailiff named Yanni Yogi. And of course, it was with that time of them being trapped that Gregory both Gregory Edgeworth and Yanni Yogi began to have an altercation. Of course, leaving young Miles to basically just throw a gun at the two of them to stop, well, specifically Yanni Yogi, to stop him from hurting his father. And, well, it ended up with him shooting shooting Manfred von Karma in the arm. Of course, yeah, we all know what happened next. Once the elevator opened and Manfred von Karma saw all three of them unconscious, yeah, von Karma just took the initiative to get revenge on Miles Edgeworth and kill him with Yanni Yogi's own gun. And then he ends up taking Miles Edgeworth in order to mold him to be like him until the eventual final case in Phoenix in the first Ace Attorney game, where he basically frames Edgeworth for a murder he didn't commit. But even after that fact of being, well, manipulated by von Karma, this allowed Edgeworth to remember everything that his father stood for, and heck, by the time of Spirit of Justice, he eventually became very well known in the law profession, as well as a sort of staunch ally to Phoenix Wright, as well as the likes of both Apollo Justice and Athena Sykes. I guess that's what you can say. That's what I call rising from the ashes. Plus, I have some words about Manfred von Karma, but that's gonna have to wait for another day. Trust me, there are a lot of characters I'm going to have some words for. Moving on, next at number 3, we have Grile from Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Yeah. When it comes down to Fire Emblem... Moving on to Fire Emblem Fathers... Yeah. It's kind of interesting once you realize a lot of RPGs have a fair amount of fathers in the game, so it's hard to choose one. I mean, in terms of Fire Emblem, there are several fathers that came to mind. I mean, Elwood and Sigurd, to be being 2 examples. And heck, even Chrom from Awakening. However, there were 2 fathers that came to mind, and while I was very close to choosing Geralt from Fire Emblem 3 Houses, if you know, you know, I had to mention about the very first mercenary leader and father of a Fire Emblem protagonist, Grile. And honestly, it's not for nothing, but considering how Grile is the leader of his own band of mercenaries and a skilled warrior in his own right, yeah, no wonder Ike turns out to be the pinnacle of manliness that we see in Radiant Dawn. Never mind the fact that Ike is largely just based on Guts from Berserk. But that being said, Guile is basically... We basically see mentions of Guile as a mercenary, but he was originally a member of the one of the original members of the Four Riders of Dayan, which is basically saying alongside the likes of Toronio, Bryce, and even Jill's, and even I believe Jill's father, Shiharam. And he was a skilled warrior in his own right. That being, which is really saying a lot. And of course, as such, he also was a caring husband to his wife Elena, and a caring father to both his son and daughter, Ike and Mist. Of course, that being said, things tend to go a little awry when he ends up touching Laurent's medallion and becoming corrupted as a result, killing his wife in the process. Of course, this ends up with the tendons in his, I believe his right arm, I believe, his sword arm being severed, so he can't pick up a blade again. Eventually, this leads him to picking up an axe and becoming the leader of the Guile mercenaries. Where, of course, as well as spending time teaching his son Ike how to wield a blade himself, as well as becoming a great father. Even allowing him to join the Guile mercenaries as well. Of course, that being said, that doesn't mean he's not hard on his son, as after he, Boyd, Reese, and Oscar end up heading to rescue both Mist and Rolf from a group of bandits. Yeah, he comes down hard on Ike and basically showing a disappointment in him for disobeying his orders. Basically putting him on probationary measures. Of course, that being said, he still believes he can become the leader that he knows he could be. And eventually this does come to fruition when he ends up facing off against the Black Knight and loses. Of course, that being said, this means Ike ends up getting the leadership of the Guile mercenaries passed to him. And yeah, in all fairness, it proves how much of a not only a solid teacher he was to his son, but how confident and he was in Ike's ability to lead the Guile mercenaries. And this led Ike to take all of that to heart. Full stop. Granted, while Shannon and Gatry do leave, they eventually do return. Shannon unreluctantly. But honestly, the fact that all this happened in the span of 2 games, yeah, no wonder Guile stands at the top of the fatherhood pyramid in Fire Emblem. Just no wonder. Moving on next at number 2, we have Norman from the Pokemon franchise. In fairness, yeah, Pokemon has a fair share of notable fathers. And while I was gonna mention the likes of Giovanni and Professor Turo, yeah, you gotta mention, I had to give a mention to Hoenn, to the Hoenn games, being the only games where you actually have a father in the game. And keep in mind, most protagonists don't have a notable father in the game. Just, they end up getting mentioned just as a sort of oversight. But in Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, and the remakes, Norman is basically just involved in his child's life. And this is saying a lot since he was originally from Johto, specifically Olivine City, before moving his family to Hoenn for a job opportunity as the Petalburg City gym leader. And when the game starts, basically has you as either Brendan or May starting off the game as a beginning Pokemon trainer and gaining your first Pokemon from Professor Birch. Of course, at the start of your Pokemon journey, the first place you go to is Petalburg City, where you come across your father in order to show him your Pokemon. And of course, this is also where you meet Wally, who in the remakes does serve to be your rival. And heck to the originals as well. But while he serves as sort of father figure to Wally, and allowing him to borrow a Zigzagoon in order to help him capture his Ralts. Yeah, he's still your father, and he basically gets you on your journey to get all the gym badges in order to eventually face off against you in battle. And once you do get the first 4 Hoenn gym badges, you come back and you basically get a chance to face off against Norman as best. And surprisingly enough, the remake showed this perfectly as he's just kneeling by the window, and he's more or less somewhat takes notice of you while he's by the window. And even with that, he goes all out, as his teams are some of the most powerful strongest teams that you've ever faced against this point. I mean, sure, he does have Vigoroth, which is a powerful Pokemon in its own sense, especially with Vital Spirit preventing it from falling asleep. But he has not 1, but 2 Slaking, which basically have a base stat total of 670. That is as much as a legendary Pokemon. Yeah, never mind that it's nerfed by Truant. This thing is a monster. Those things are monsters. And they are powerful either knowing Facade in the original Hoenn games or Retaliate in the remakes. And they hit like trucks. Even in Emerald, he's still pretty powerful. Replacing one of his Slaking with a Linoon and a Spinda. And while his Linoon is free, his Spinda's pretty difficult to face off against due to knowing Psybeam and Feint Attack. But that being said, all of that is just a test of your abilities. And basically, it's not just him going easy. It's not him going easy on you. He's going all out in his battle against you because he sees you as not just father and son, but as equals. Oh my god. And again, in the remake, when he loses, while he's in disbelief, there's a bit of a tear of joy coming to it on his face. Almost like he's proud that you've gotten as strong as you are. And heck, even when after exiting the gym and you and Wally head to Marvel City, both he and Wally's father stick behind and reminisce about how strong their kids have gotten. Which honestly really does say a lot. And that's not even mentioning the anime version of Norman, the versions of Norman from the anime and the manga. But that is another story all entirely. And maybe I might do a mention of Norman. Who's to say? Finally, at number 1, we have Bowser from Super Mario Brothers. Yup. When it comes down to it, Bowser is one of the most notable faces in the Mario franchise. Much more notable than the likes of Mario and Luigi, or even Princess Peach herself. And it's especially due to the fact that Bowser is known for, well, his constant efforts of trying to capture Peach and, in specific games, even marry her. Which really does say a lot. However, even with that, the fact that the matter is, Bowser's kind of an interesting father when it comes to many of his kids. I mean, bringing the Koopalings to mind, that is you definitely see those paternal instincts coming to mind with them. Especially in Super Mario Bros. 3. However, in Super Mario Sunshine, we're introduced to his biological son, Bowser Jr., who has taken the form of Shadow Mario in order to capture Peach, who he believes is his mother. And all because Bowser told him that Peach was his mother and Mario is a terrible man. And that being said, in the second half of the game after this reveal, you have to find a way to rescue Peach from Bowser and Bowser Jr.'s clutches and the Bad Dub Hot Tub. And yeah, we do see a bit of humanity in the Koopa King himself, because at the end of that, at the end of the game, Bowser finally takes the chance to try and to basically tell his son that Peach is not his mother. Only for Bowser Jr. to tell him that he knows. Surprising Bowser. But of course, the fact that Bowser Jr. basically mentions that when he wants to face Mario again when he grows up, yeah, honestly, it serves as a sort of a nice little bonding moment between Bowser and his son. And we've definitely seen that ever since then, as Bowser Jr. has kind of taken the role of many different bosses is in many of the platformers, basically due to Bowser helping him out. And he really does show, but even with that, he shows a bit of a fatherly side, a stern fatherly side to him in many other different games. As in Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, we do see Bowser basically contacting Bowser Jr. on the phone to check on him, largely to see him, largely to find out how he's doing and whether he's done all his homework and chores. As well as in the mention of the Nintendo Switch, of everything involving Nintendo Switch parental controls. We even see him protecting Bowser Jr. from things that are a little too adult for his age. And even in the Super Mario Galaxy movie, we do see a much kinder Bowser much kinder and humbler Bowser in that movie, especially in considering Luigi, especially thanks to Luigi. Yeah, basically Bowser Jr. does whatever he can to basically not only get his father back, but to basically make him but does whatever he can to make him proud of him. And honestly, the fact that we see a sort of, this is the most, it's basically the two of them just being evil. It's one of the most humanistic moments we've seen of the Koopa King in so many years. Also, the fact that he is able to send them to boarding school is surprising, which makes me wonder how that was the case. But yeah, again, he also has done some moments of rage, like going full nuclear after being painted with black paint in Bowser's Fury, and thus becoming Fury Bowser. But yeah, drop in the bucket. And it's all that moment. That's why Bowser is definitely number one. And with that, those are the top 10 best fathers in video games. Like, comment, subscribe, join my Patreon if you want to. At patreon.com/theautistic It's free for anyone to join. And if you want to pay, that's fine too, because I have 3 tiers that you can join. But you don't have any pressure to do so, because I don't want anyone to destroy their financial situation. And with that, have a happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And to those watching, call your fathers, and call your dads, and tell them you love them. And to thank them for just being there for you. See you next time.